The silence was absolute and it was killing her. Empress Ziliana, sovereign of the Vishari Star dynasty, scourge of the celestial armadas, sat utterly alone in the center of a banquet hall the size of a starship hangar. A feast of luminous, jewel-like fruits and steaming, spiced meats from a dozen conquered worlds lay, untouched on polished black obsidian before her. The problem wasn't the food. It was the silence. A deep, profound artificial silence that had been her prison for 3 long, agonizing years. Her magnificent opalescent cranial crests, which once shimmered with the emotions of her people, now lay flat and dull against her scalp. Her hearing membranes, delicate, fin-like structures on either side of her elegant, elongated skull, were inert, burned to useless scar tissue in the same betrayal that had stolen her family. She was the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy, and she could not hear the crackle of the hearth fire, the distant song of her crystalline gardens, or the whispered deceit of her court. She raised a 3-fingered taloned hand, the scales gleaming like amethyst under the triple moons, light streaming through the vaulted windows. She gestured a sharp imperial flick. A servitor drone, a floating orb of bronze and blue light, hummed from the shadows. It projected words into the air before her in the swirling glyphs of High Vishari. Your radiance requires? Ziliana's hands moved, graceful and sharp. Sign language. The only language left to her. The drone translated, its synthetic voice flat in the hollow silence of her mind. The human. The janitor. Where is he? The drone's light pulsed. Unit J77's shift concluded at the 20th bell. He has returned to the lower habitation spire. A wave of desolation, colder than the void between stars, washed over her. Another meal alone. Another cycle of deafness in a palace of ghosts. She picked up a knife, its handle carved from the bone of a beast her great-grandmother had slain. The blade trembled, not from weakness, but from a fury so vast and impotent it threatened to shatter her from within. She was about to drive the knife into the table, to feel a vibration, any vibration, when a shadow moved at the far end of the hall. Not a servitor, smaller, illegally small. A child. A human child no more than 6 standard years, with a mop of unruly brown hair and wide galaxy blue eyes, stood frozen in the servant's entrance, clutching a dirty rag. She was staring not at the Empress in terror but at the full untouched plates. Her stomach gave a loud, audible gurgle, a sound Ziliana saw in the slight jump of the child's shoulders. Not heard. The Empress froze, the knife held aloft. Who had let this creature, the scrap of the conquered, filthy species, into her sanctum? Was this the final insult, the final proof of her vulnerability? Rage ignited her blood. She would have the child's parents flayed, the security detail spaced. The little girl did the unthinkable. She didn't run. She didn't bow. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. Her eyes darted from the furious alien queen to a small, purple puffball fruit on the nearest platter. She pointed a small, grubby finger at it, then at her own open mouth. Her eyebrows lifted in a silent, desperate, universally understood question. Can I? The Empress of the Vishari, the deaf dragon queen, stared, her knife forgotten. The question hung in the silent space between them, more deafening than any explosion. Who was this human rat, and why was she not afraid? Micro cliffhanger. Before we continue, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. We always read every message. Kalen's world was one of grease, whispered prayers, and echoing metallic groans. The lower habitation spire, known derisively as the Roots, was a tangled undercity burrowed into the bedrock beneath the soaring, crystalline towers of the Vishari Imperial Citadel. Here the air was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen, boiled nutrient paste, and human sweat. Conduit pipes pulsed with stolen energy like glowing arteries along grimy walls. This was where the conquered lived. The humans. Kalen wiped his brow with the back of a grease-stained hand, leaving a new smear next to the old ones. His maintenance exosuit, a clunky, second-hand framework of hydraulics and patched cables, hissed as he tightened. A bolt on a throbbing plasma conduit. The vibration traveled up the tool and into his bones, a constant, familiar hum. His eyes, the same deep blue as his daughter's, were shadowed with a fatigue no amount of sleep could fix. 3 years. 3 years since the Vishari dragon ships had darkened. The skies of Earth that was, their silent descent heralding not war, but a brutal, efficient annexation. Humanity's fleets were splinters against their shields, our AIs useless against their neuromatrix warfare. We lost in a week. Not out of weakness, Kalen believed, but out of surprise. The Vishari weren't conquerors of blood and soil. They were collectors of complexity. They wanted our chaos, our ingenuity, our stubborn, illogical spirit as curiosities, as labor, as a puzzle to be solved and owned. Kalen, a former civil engineer, was now Unit J77, janitorial and basic maintenance. His wife Ilara, a theoretical physicist, was gone. She had been at the Geneva Institute when the first neural dampeners fell, silencing all electronic and long-range biological communication in a pulse of violet light. He never heard from her again. Presumed dead in the pacification, all he had left was Lyra, his little star. He finished the repair, the exosuit whining as he stood. From a pouch on his belt he pulled a small hand-carved wooden bird, its wings swept back. He ran a thumb over it, a talisman of a world gone quiet. His personal struggle wasn't rebellion. That was a quick path to the airlock. His struggle was preservation. Preserving Lyra's smile, her humanity, her hope, in a world designed to grind it out of her. He taught her numbers with rust flakes, letters with condensation on pipes, and stories of Earth with whispers in the dark. He broke 1,000 Vishari laws just by loving her. The citadel above was a different universe, a symphony of light and impossible architecture. Buildings were grown, not constructed, from psychosensitive crystal that shifted hue with the occupants' moods. Bridges of solidified light arced between spires. The air was perfumed with exotic pollens and sang with the subtle, subharmonic music of the Vishari themselves, a language of scent, subtle bioluminescence, and soft ultrasonic trills, a language Kalen could never perceive, and one that was now permanently silent for their empress. He knew of Empress Ziliana, of course. Everyone did. Her image was on every official screen, a being of terrifying austere beauty, with scales of midnight and amethyst, eyes like liquid mercury, and those majestic cranial crests. The story, fed to the human populace via the compliant integration network, was that she was a reclusive, unparalleled genius, focusing on the mysteries of the cosmos. But Kalen in his silent corridors and service ducts heard the other sounds. The absence of sound, the way the Vishari nobles moved through the upper halls with a subdued, anxious quickness, the way the military caste, the Kravik with their brutish, armored scales and horned heads, seemed to hold more and more sway. The Empress, they whispered in the parts of the network the sensors missed, was diminished. She had returned from a campaign against the insectoid Xylac 3 years ago, the sole survivor of her flagship, her family lost, her hearing membranes scorched away. She was a dragon, wounded and trapped in a gilded cage of her own palace. Kalen's route tonight had taken him through the upper kitchen delivery halls. He'd seen the extravagant waste, the trays of untouched delicacies headed for the reprocessors while his sector's ration was cut again. A bitter anger had coiled in his gut. He'd pocketed a single bruised lum fruit for Lyra, a tiny act of defiance that could cost him his hands. He returned to their hab unit, a single room with a recessed sleeping pad and a sanitizer corner. Lyra wasn't there. His heart stopped. The wooden bird fell from his fingers, clattering on the metal floor. Lyra? His voice was a hoarse crack. He tore the room apart. Nothing, a cold terror, sharper than any Vishari blade, speared him. Then he saw it. The small access panel for the tertiary cleaning duct, a duct he'd shown her once in a panic. A last resort hiding place from spot inspections, was slightly ajar. Scuff marks led into the darkness. She'd gone exploring, upward toward the forbidden zones, toward the Dragon Queen's palace. Kalen didn't think. He shoved himself into the duct, the exosuit scraping against the sides, and began to crawl, fear lending speed to his aching limbs. He had to find her before the palace security did, before she did. The stories of the Empress's wrath, even diminished, were legion. His mind raced with images too terrible to bear. Micro cliffhanger. In the banquet hall, time had stretched into a silent, crystalline tableau. The human child Lyra took another step. The Empress, Liliana, slowly lowered the bone-handled knife, placing it on the obsidian with a soft click that sent a tiny vibration through the table. A vibration she felt in her fingertips. Her anger had not abated, but it had been hijacked by a shock of pure, unprecedented curiosity. This creature should be a puddle of fear. The pheromones of human terror were a specific, acrid scent she knew well. This child emitted only a faint, milky warmth, and the sharp, sour tang of hunger. Ziliana gestured. The servitor drone zipped closer, projecting glyphs. Shall I summon the Kravik guard your radiance? This is a level 5 contamination. Ziliana's hands moved. No, stand by. She kept her mercury eyes fixed on Lyra. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the small, purple puffball fruit of Velshira, sweet and mildly narcotic to Vishari. Probably harmless to humans. She held it out on her palm, her talons looking monstrous next to its delicate skin. Lyra's eyes went round. She glanced at the Empress's face, then at the fruit, her internal battle visible on her tiny features. Hunger won. She shuffled forward, her small shoes making no sound on the iridescent floor. She stopped an arm's length away, the distance between a god and a gnat. Then, with a politeness imprinted by her father, she gave a clumsy, little bow before carefully plucking the fruit from the Empress's scaled palm. She took a small bite. Juice glowing a faint blue dribbled down her chin. Her face lit up with a brilliance that outshone the chandeliers. A smile, unrestrained and full of wonder, broke through the grime. It was a seismic event in the silent hall. Ziliana flinched. Not from threat, but from the sheer unadulterated signal of that smile. In her world of subtle hues, guarded pheromones, and the crushing void of silence, this human child was a supernova of simple emotion. She found herself leaning forward, her cranial crests tilting unconsciously in a vishari, sign of focused attention she hadn't used in years. Lyra finished the fruit, licking her fingers. Then she did something else. She pointed to her own ear, then to Ziliana's inert hearing membranes, her head tilted in a perfect mimicry of questioning confusion. "You can't hear?" The bluntness of the gesture was like a physical blow. No one, not even her most trusted advisor before the betrayal, had ever addressed her disability so directly. It was the elephant in the room, the size of a planet. This child just pointed at it. Ziliana nodded once, a stiff regal motion. Lyra's expression shifted to one of profound, heartbreaking empathy. She frowned, her little brow furrowing. Then she looked around, her eyes landing on the Empress's empty, ornate plate. She scurried over, her rag forgotten. She picked up the heavy plate. It was almost as big as her torso, and brought it back. She placed it carefully on the floor between them. Then, with a determined look, she raised her small fist and brought it down on the plate's center. Bongi. A low, clear, ringing note reverberated through the stone floor. It traveled up through the legs of the obsidian table, through the Empress's chair and into her body. A vibration, a sound she could feel. Ziliana's breath caught. Her hand flew to her chest. For 3 years, her world had been a high-definition film on mute. Now this human child had just added subtitle through touch. It was crude, it was simple, but it was communication. Real, intentional communication that wasn't filtered through a drone's flat translation. Tentatively, Ziliana reached out and tapped the plate with a single talon. Tink. Lyra grinned and tapped it twice in quick succession. Right up tap. Back and forth it went. A silent, vibrational conversation. Bong, tap, tap, tink, bong, bong. It was a language of one. The Dragon Queen and the Janitor's daughter. Speaking through the resonance of fine china, this fragile, impossible moment was shattered by the heavy, synchronized thud of armored boots. 4 Kravik guards, hulking and bristling with weaponry, stormed into the hall, their horned heads scanning for threats. They saw the human child immediately and raised their pulse rifles, the barrels humming to life with a violet charge. The lead guard's voice was a guttural roar that Ziliana saw in the shudder of his chestplate. Contaminant. Do not move, vermin. Lyra froze, the smile wiped from her face, replaced by pure terror. She dropped the plate. It shattered on the floor with a discordant final crash. Ziliana was on her feet before she knew it. A fury, white-hot and primal, erupted from her. This was her hall. This was her moment of something. Connection? And these armored thugs, who answered more to her shadow chancellor, Vorlax, than to her, were ruining it. Her hands moved in a furious blur. The servitor drone translated, its volume amplified to a shout. You will lower your weapons. The lead Kravik hesitated, his rifle still aimed at the cowering Lyra. Your Radiance. The human is a security breach. Protocol demands. Protocol demands you obey your Empress. The glyphs flashed scarlet in the air. The child is under my protection, leave now. The command, backed by centuries of imperial authority, crackled in the air. The Kravik guards lowered their rifles, reluctance in every line of their bodies. They bowed stiffly and backed out of the hall, but not before the lead guard shot a final, venomous look at Lyra. Silence returned, heavier now, laced with threat. Lyra was trembling, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Ziliana looked from the shattered plate to the terrified child, and a cold realization dawned. This was not an accident. A human child could not have bypassed all security on her own. She had been allowed to come here, or sent. Was this Vorlax's doing? A test? A provocation to demonstrate her irrationality, her instability? She had to know, and she needed to get the child to safety, which, paradoxically, might only be here under her direct, if bewildered, protection. She gestured to the servitor, her movement slower now. I bring up a sitting cushion, and a plate of simple, non-toxic carbohydrates, and proteins, human-compatible, scanned from the medical database. As the drone zipped away, Ziliana knelt. It was an ungainly motion for her long-limbed regal body. Bringing her eye to eye with Lyra, the child flinched but held her ground. Ziliana pointed to herself, then made a gentle, palm-down patting motion near the floor. Stay safe. Then she pointed at Lyra, then at the broken plate, and tilted her head in question. Who? Why? Lyra, sniffling, just shook her head. her confusion as deep as the Empress's. The mystery had just deepened, and the danger had solidified around them both. Mini cliffhanger. Kalen emerged from a ventilation grate into a sterile, quiet corridor of polished white stone. Far above the grime of the roots, he was utterly lost. The Citadel's upper levels were a labyrinth of aesthetic, beauty and paranoid security. He could hear the distant rhythmic march of Kravik patrols. His exosuit would mark him as maintenance, but his panic would mark him as a threat. He had to think. Lyra was curious, not stupid. She followed patterns, warmth, light, and the biggest source of consistent scheduled activity up here was waste disposal and food service. The kitchen supply lines. Using his intimate knowledge of the service blueprints he'd memorized to avoid notice, he began navigating the back channels, his heart a drum against his ribs. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a Vishari in simple gray robes, a scholar caste. The Vishari recoiled, his scent pouches releasing a burst of startled amber and ozone, but his eyes, large and dark, held not malice but a frantic curiosity. He grabbed Kalen's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You are the human from the lower spires?" J77, he hissed, his voice modulated through a small pendant. His gaze darted around. "You seek your offspring?" Kalen's blood ran cold. "Where is she?" "The Empress's private banquet hall." The Kravik tried to take her, but the Empress intervened. The scholar's expression was one of awe and fear. "This is unprecedented. Vorlax will not allow it." "Who are you?" "I am Erson, a historian of cross-species communication. I serve the former Crown Prince." His voice dropped. "Your child is in grave danger, but she may also be the key to something greater. The Empress's silence is not just a personal tragedy. It is a political weapon used against her. She cannot hear the lies of her court, the plots of Vorlax. He is consolidating power, preparing to dissolve the monarchy in favor of a military junta. The child. She found a way to speak to her, didn't she?" Without sound. Kalen's mind reeled. His little girl, a pawn in an alien coup. "I just want her back. And if retrieving her dooms an empire to tyranny, and your own people to extermination, Vorlax believes humanity is a disease. He advocates for cleansing." Erson's words were ice. "The Empress is our only hope. And your daughter has reached her. You must get to the hall, but you cannot go as a janitor. Come." Erson pulled him into a side chamber, filled with holographic scrolls and data crystals. He produced a set of gray scholar robes. "Put this on. Keep the hood up. I will guide you to the outer anteroom. What happens then is in the talons of fate." As Kalen shed his exosuit and donned the robes, feeling like an actor in a play he never auditioned for, a new fear took root. This wasn't just about finding Lyra anymore. It was about saving her from a danger he could scarcely comprehend. And somehow, her survival was now tied to that of the deaf dragon queen who ruled them all. Mini cliffhanger. Before the story takes its next shocking turn, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and notification bell. What happens next changes everything for the Empress, for Lyra, and for all of humanity. Don't miss a second. In the banquet hall, a bizarre new routine had established itself. Lyra sat on a plush cushion, nibbling on a piece of bland, nutritionally complete human bread, her fear slowly ebbing under the strange, watchful gaze of the Empress. Ziliana had resumed her seat, but her posture was different, less rigid, more inclined forward. The servitor drone hovered nearby, a silent witness. Ziliana pointed to the bread, then made an open-palmed, fluttering gesture near her own mouth, a Vishari sign for satisfactory. Lyra, catching on, gave a thumbs up, a human gesture Ziliana studied with intense interest. Emboldened, Lyra pointed to a magnificent tapestry on the wall depicting a starfield. She then made a sweeping motion with her arms and gave a questioning look. "What is that?" Ziliana understood. She gestured, and the servitor projected a holographic star map above the table. She pointed to a specific, glowing nebula, then mimed a ship flying, then an explosion, then closed her eyes and let her head drop. A story of travel and loss. Lyra's eyes softened. She pointed to Ziliana, then made a cradling rocking motion, her head tilted. "Your family?" The Empress's mercury eyes seemed to shimmer. She nodded, a single slow, heavy dip of her head. The shared language of loss bridged the light years between them. Lyra scrambled off her cushion, walked over, and before Ziliana could react, placed her small hand on the Empress's scaled, three-fingered one. The touch was electric, warm, soft, and utterly fearless. In that touch, Ziliana didn't just feel comfort. She felt a memory buried under layers of grief and neural trauma. The specific bioresonance, the faint, almost undetectable electromagnetic signature of a human touch. It was a ghost from the ashes of her flagship. Her eyes snapped wide. Her free hand flew to her temple. Flashes, the bridge of her ship. The Star Dancer. The Xylac ambush. Not an ambush, a trap. Coordinates fed to the enemy. A betrayal from within. The searing pain as a console exploded near her head. The neurotoxin burning her membranes. And in the chaos as she staggered, blinded and deafened, a hand. A human hand in a Vishari auxiliary officer's uniform. Pulling her toward an escape pod. A face streaked with smoke and determination. A voice shouting soundlessly, "This way!" The pod jettisoning. The final view of the Star Dancer fracturing. With her mate and fledgling still aboard. The memory, unlocked by Lyra's touch, crashed over her with the force of a supernova. It wasn't just any human. It was him. The traitor on her ship had been a Vishari, but her savior had been human. The servitor drone suddenly flickered, its light turning a hostile crimson. A new familiar voice, smooth, oily, and laced with mock concern, boomed from it. No longer her chosen text, but an audio transmission. Vorlax's voice forced into her silent world. "My dear bereaved Empress, we have been monitoring this." Touching scene. A human child magically appearing in your sanctum. A human father, now disguised as one of our scholars, sneaking through the palace. A coordinated plot, clearly. An assassination attempt, perhaps? Or merely a scheme to manipulate your delicate condition? Xiliana shot to her feet, shoving Lyra behind her. She glared at the drone as if it were Vorlax himself. "The Council of Claws is convened. Your emotional compromise is evident. You have harbored a human contaminant, dismissed your loyal guard on their whim. The evidence of your unfitness to rule is now irrefutable. By the authority of the Council, I, Shadow Chancellor Vorlax, declare you under Regent's arrest. The Kravik are on their way. Do not resist. For the good of the dynasty." The transmission cut. The drone went dark and clattered to the floor. The trap was sprung. Lyra hadn't been sent by Vorlax. Her arrival had been a happy accident. He was now exploiting masterfully. He had used the child as bait to demonstrate the Empress's instability, and Kaelin's desperate search as proof of a human conspiracy. The great doors of the banquet hall hissed open. Not just 4 Kravik, but a full squad of 12 led by Vorlax himself. He was smaller than the warriors, his scales a dull bureaucratic gray, but his eyes were black pits of cunning. He held a neural disruptor, a weapon designed to overload the nervous system of a Vishari. It would be agony for Xiliana. "Take the child," Vorlax said, his voice dripping with false pity. "Secure the Empress gently, she is unwell." As 2 Kravik moved toward Lyra, who screamed soundlessly and clung to Xiliana's leg. Another door, the servant's entrance, burst open. Kaelin, in his stolen robes, stood there, Erzin behind him. He saw Lyra, saw the armored guards, saw the terrifying, magnificent alien protecting his daughter. "Lyra!" he roared. All heads turned. In that split second of distraction, Xiliana moved. She was not a warrior queen for nothing. With a speed that blurred, she swept Lyra up with one arm, placing the child behind the heavy obsidian table. With her other hand, she grabbed the fallen servitor drone and hurled it at the nearest Kravik with devastating force, knocking him off his feet. The hall erupted into chaos. Pulse rifles whined. Kaelin ducked as a bolt shattered the wall above him. He had no weapon. He had only his desperation. He lunged not for a guard, but for Vorlax. Xiliana, meanwhile, fought with silent, terrifying grace. She used the table as a shield, flipping it on its side with a grunt of effort. She disarmed a Kravik with a twist of his wrist, using his own rifle to blast another. But she was outnumbered, and her primary focus was shielding Lyra. A pulse bolt grazed her shoulder, and she staggered, a scent of burnt ozone and her own copper-like blood filling the air. Kaelin tackled Vorlax. The Shadow Chancellor was wiry and strong, his talons raking across Kaelin's back, shredding the robes. The neural disruptor clattered away. They wrestled on the floor, a struggle of pure, desperate hatred. Kaelin got his hands around Vorlax's throat, ignoring the scales cutting his palms. "You will not touch my daughter," he snarled. Vorlax gagged, his eyes bulging. He rasped, "Fool. She's already dead." The order is given for all human enclaves. Kaelin's blood went cold. A genocide. Starting now. He was slammed off Vorlax by a massive Kravik fist. He hit the ground, stars exploding in his vision. He saw Xiliana, wounded, cornered behind the overturned table, covering Lyra with her body as rifles took aim for a killing shot. The Empress met Kaelin's eyes across the chaotic room. In that moment, he saw not a dragon queen, but a mother terrified for a child not her own. He saw her regret, her fury, her defeat. And he saw her mouth a single, silent word in the shape of human lips, a word she must have learned from long-forgotten archives. "Sorry." It was over. Vorlax stood gasping, retrieving his disruptor. He aimed it at the helpless Empress. "Goodbye, Xiliana. The dynasty thanks you for your silent sacrifice." He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The weapon's power cell was dead. A small carved wooden bird, Kalen's talisman, was jammed into its energy port. Lyra, peeking from behind Ziliana, gave a tiny, fierce smile. She had crawled and placed it there during the fight. The hesitation was all Ziliana needed. With a final roaring surge of strength she didn't know she had, she shoved the massive table forward, crushing 2 Kravik against the wall. She snatched up a fallen pulse rifle, and in a move of breathtaking precision, shot the crystalline chandelier above Vorlax and the remaining guards. It came crashing down in a rain of shards and sparks, engulfing them. Silence once more. But this time it was the silence after a storm. Panting, bleeding, Ziliana turned. Kalen struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding side. They stared at each other. The human janitor and the alien queen. Surrounded by the wreckage of a coup, Lyra ran to her father, burying her face in his torn robes. Erson crept from the doorway, his face ashen. The communication jammer Vorlax installed. It is still active in the Citadel spire. The order to purge the human enclaves. It will be carried out by his subordinates unless countermanded with the Empress's full biometric authority. We have minutes. Ziliana looked at Kalen, then down at Lyra, who was looking up at her with those immense, trusting blue eyes. The child who shared vibrations. The child who unlocked a memory of salvation. The child whose simple touch reminded her what it was to protect, not just rule. She pointed to Kalen, then to the door, then made a flying motion. She then pointed to herself, to Lyra, and made a firm, staying gesture. You go, we stay. Kalen understood. She was sending him, a human, with Erson, to the communication spire to stop a genocide. She would stay here, wounded with his daughter, as the ultimate, vulnerable guarantee of his return. It was a leap of faith across a chasm of species, rank, and tragedy. He nodded, his throat tight. He kissed Lyra's head. Be brave, my star. Listen to the Empress. He and Erson sprinted into the smoke-filled corridor, leaving the deaf dragon queen alone once more. But this time, with a human child holding her hand. The stakes had just become the survival of 2 species, and the fate of everything hung on a father's speed and a queen's fragile, newfound trust. Major cliffhanger. Alone in the shattered hall with Lyra, Ziliana's regal composure finally cracked. The adrenaline faded, leaving the searing pain in her shoulder and a deeper ache of loneliness and responsibility. She slid down behind the overturned table, her energy spent. Lyra, sensing her distress, didn't cling or cry. Instead, she sat beside her, a small warm presence against her scaled side. She found a large, smooth piece of the broken plate and carefully placed it on the floor between them. She looked at Ziliana's wounded shoulder, her small face etched with worry, then gently tapped the plate. Tap. A question. Are you okay? A tear iridescent like a liquid pearl escaped Ziliana's mercury eye. She had not cried since the Star Dancer. She reached out a trembling taloned finger and tapped back. Tink. I am here. They sat in the vibrating silence, the child offering comfort the only way she could, the Empress learning to receive it. Ziliana thought of her own fledglings, their playful chirps forever silent. She looked at Lyra, this brave, illogical, wonderful human child, and felt a fierce, protective love ignite in a heart she thought had turned to ash. This was not her blood, but this was her charge. For the first time in 3 years, she had something to fight for beyond duty or vengeance. She had someone to protect. Meanwhile, Kalen and Erson raced through the Citadel's service corps. Kalen's knowledge of the ducts and conduits proved invaluable, allowing them to bypass patrols, now thrown into confusion by the fallen chandelier's impact on security systems. As they ran, Erson gasped out more of the truth. Vorlax had sabotaged the Empress's ship, killing her family to cripple her emotionally, then used her deafness to isolate and manipulate her, plotting to wipe out humanity as a chaotic variable in his clean, militant new order. She is not our oppressor, Kalen, Erson panted. She is our last hope. And your people, you are hers. Kalen's mind reeled. All his quiet hatred for the Vishari had been misdirected at a figurehead, a fellow victim of the true monster. His struggle wasn't just to preserve Lyra's humanity. It was to help restore an alien queen's, and in doing so, save his entire species. They reached the sealed door of the communications spire. Biometric lock, Empress only. Kalen stared at it, despair rising. They had come all this way for nothing. Then Erson produced a small data crystal, a final gift from the Crown Prince before he died. A back door, for emergencies. He slotted it in. The door hissed open. Inside, a massive holographic sphere displayed the Citadel and the sprawling human enclaves below. A countdown glowed over the routes 000217. On the main console, a physical switch was protected under a crystal casing. A dead man's switch for the fleet-wide purge order. Kalen didn't hesitate. He smashed the casing with a fallen piece of conduit and threw the switch. The countdown froze at 000103, then dissolved. A standard system message flashed. Stand down order acknowledged. Pending Imperial verification. Verification. They needed Zeliana here now. Back in the hall, the sound of more armored footsteps approached. Not the clumsy Kravik, but lighter, faster. The Empress's personal guard. The Silnai, elegant and lethal, finally breaking through Vorlax's jamming. Their captain, seeing the Empress wounded and with a human child, froze in confusion. Zeliana rose every inch the Sovereign despite her injury. She gestured sharply, her hands painting commands in the air. The captain, reading her signs, bowed deeply. She pointed to Lyra, then to the captain, then to her own side. Protect her with your life. Just as the Silnai moved to secure the area, a hidden panel in the wall, Vorlax's private escape route, slid open. A single wounded and furious Kravik guard, buried but not killed by the chandelier, emerged. He saw Lyra separated from Zeliana by a few feet, and saw his chance for one last act of spite for his fallen master. He leveled his rifle directly at the child. Zeliana saw it. There was no time to push Lyra, no time to shout a warning. There was only one thing to do. She moved. In a flash of amethyst and midnight, she placed herself between the rifle and Lyra. The pulse bolt, meant for the child's heart, struck the Empress square in the chest. A silent scream tore through Zeliana. She didn't hear the blast, but she felt the universe implode in white-hot agony. She crumpled to her knees, her body smoking. Lyra's real, audible scream of terror finally pierced the air, a sound Zeliana would have given anything to hear. The Silnai captain vaporized the Kravik guard a second later. Lyra threw herself onto the fallen Empress, her small hands pressing against the terrible wound, her tears falling on the scorched scales. No, 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 please. She sobbed, the words meaningless vibrations to Zeliana, but the emotion as clear as starlight. Zeliana's vision was darkening. She looked up at the crying child, this tiny light in her long night. With her last bit of strength, she lifted a heavy hand and cupped Lyra's wet cheek. She formed the human word again with her lips, a final silent breath. Family. Then Kalen and Erzin burst in, having used the comm-spire to locate her. Kalen saw his daughter sobbing over the fallen queen, saw the mortal wound. His heart shattered. He ran to them, pulling Lyra into his arms, his eyes meeting Zeliana's dimming ones. He saw not an empress, but the being who had died for his child. The order is stopped, he said, knowing she couldn't hear, praying she could understand. Thank you. A strange peace settled on Zeliana's face. Then a flicker, a spark deep within her mercury eyes. The neural pathways, shocked by the point-blank blast, damaged by the old injury, began to fire in a desperate, chaotic cascade. A final surge of Vishari biology fighting death. A sound, distant, tinny, warped, like a radio through water. It was Lyra's weeping. It was the hum of the broken lights. It was the rustle of the Silnai's armor. It was a noise. Terrible, painful, miraculous noise. Her hearing membranes, the scar tissue, glowed with a faint internal light. They weren't healed, but they were rebooting. A crude biological backup system, activated by trauma and a surge of neurochemicals her body hadn't produced since before the betrayal. Oxytocin, dopamine, the chemicals of connection, of love. Her eyes flew open wide with shock and pain. She could hear. It was agony. It was heaven. 1 month later, Empress Zeliana sat on a new, simpler throne in a repaired but less ostentatious hall, a sleek silver neural interface now curved behind her ear, helping to modulate and process the cacophony of the world she was relearning. Her shoulder was healed, but the scar on her chest over her heart remained. Before her stood Kalen, no longer in janitor's garb, but in the uniform of the newly created position, Royal Liaison for Human Affairs. Lyra stood beside him, one small hand holding her father's, the other clutching the carved wooden bird. The hall was not silent. It buzzed with the low murmur of a mixed court. Vishari nobles, human representatives from the Roots and Silnai guards. The purge had been averted. Vorlax's conspirators were being rooted out. A new fragile alliance was being built, not on conquest, but on the foundation of a shared secret and a shared sacrifice. Zeliana's voice when she spoke was slightly metallic, filtered through her interface, but it was hers. Kalen of the Roots, for your courage, and for the life of your daughter, which is dear to me as my own, I grant you and your people full citizenship within the dynasty. The lower spires will be renovated. Human knowledge will be added to our archives. Your past will be honored and your future will be your own. It was more than anyone had dared hope for. Kalen bowed, his throat tight. Thank you, Your Radiance. Lyra, unable to contain herself, broke free and ran up the dais steps. The court held its breath. The child stopped before the throne, held out the wooden bird, and placed it gently in the Empress's lap. Then she carefully reached up and touched the new device behind Zeliana's ear. Does it hurt? Lyra whispered, her voice small in the vast hall. Ziliana heard it, clear as a bell. A tear traced her scaled cheek. She smiled, a real, warm smile that made her cranial crests glow a soft, contented blue. Sometimes, she said, her filtered voice gentle. But it is a good hurt. It reminds me I am alive. She looked from Lyra to Kaelin, then out over the mixed court. The mystery of her past was solved, the immediate threat vanquished. But as her new, sensitive hearing attuned to the room, she caught something else. A whisper, not from a Vishari or human mouth, but from the secure comm line to the astrometrics chamber. A message just decoded and relayed to her interface alone. It was a familiar, dreaded Xylac frequency. The message was brief, chilling. Asset Vorlax eliminated. Primary objective failed. Secondary target confirmed. The human child. Genetic anomaly Lyra. Resonance pattern matches the Keeper's prophecy. Acquisition protocol initiated. The warmth fled from Ziliana's face. She looked down at Lyra, who was now happily showing her how the wooden bird's wings could wiggle. The love in her heart curdled into a new, icy fear. They hadn't just stopped a coup. They had accidentally announced the existence of something or someone. The ancient, insectoid Xylac had been seeking for millennia, and they had painted a target on the back of the little girl, who had taught a queen to feel again. The meal was over. The battle was won. But the war for Lyra's future, a war spanning galaxies and rooted in a prophecy older than human civilization, had just begun.